Ladies and gentlemen, what I'm about to share with you tonight is not a list of hacks, tricks, or shortcuts. In fact, the very idea of shortcuts is the opposite of what fuels the kind of mind people often associate with unstoppable innovation. When you look closely at individuals who repeatedly push the boundaries of physics, engineering, and human possibility, you'll find something deeper than brilliance. You'll find patterns that are almost invisible, habits that look ordinary on the outside, but compound into extraordinary outcomes over time. And if there is one thing I've learned as a neuroscientist who studies high performance cognition, it's this: genius isn't an event. It's a lifestyle, a way of thinking, a way of confronting reality with such intensity that the world eventually bends. I've spent years observing, researching, and analyzing the behaviors of outlier innovators. The ones who generate ideas faster than others can absorb them, who stay calm in storms that would mentally break most people, who maintain clarity when the pressure hits volcanic levels. And again, I've found the same secret. It's not luck, not talent alone, not some mystical creativity that comes from nowhere. It's the habits, quiet habits, unromantic habits, psychological patterns, neural rhythms, behavioral cycles repeated so relentlessly that they eventually hardwire genius into daily life. One of the first habits you notice is the obsession with truth, not selective truth, not convenient truth, but raw, unfiltered, sometimes painful truth. Innovators who perform at the highest level don't lie to themselves. Their relationship with reality is almost surgical. They examine it, dissect it, challenge it, strip it down to its bones. And the strange thing is that this relationship with truth doesn't make them pessimists. It makes them visionaries. Because when you see the world exactly as it is, without emotional distortion, you gain the power to imagine it as it could be. And that imagination is grounded. It's functional. It's tethered to physics, logic, and feasibility. It's why some people don't just dream big, they build big. This habit of truth seeking is directly tied to how the brain handles complexity. Neuroscience shows that the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for long-term planning, abstract reasoning, and decision-making, thrives when ambiguity is minimized. High-performing innovators externalize chaos. They structure their thinking. They simplify the noise around them so their cognitive bandwidth remains free. This is why some of them appear blunt, straightforward, even overly direct. It's not rudeness, it's efficiency. Their minds operate like engineering systems, remove unnecessary inputs, prioritize critical variables, and optimize for clarity. Another powerful habit embedded in unstoppable innovators is what I call compulsive curiosity. Not ordinary curiosity, the kind that asks a question and then moves on, but a deep, stubborn curiosity that keeps digging until a concept becomes transparent. These are the people who don't just ask, why once? They ask why 10 times. They ask until simplicity emerges. They ask until understanding becomes so complete that they can explain the idea backwards, upside down, and from 5 different perspectives. Their curiosity is not passive. It is aggressive. It consumes information like a furnace. From a neurological standpoint, this habit rewires the dopamine system. For most people, dopamine spikes with entertainment, distraction, or novelty. For high-level innovators, dopamine spikes with understanding. The reward circuitry of their brains becomes addicted, not to pleasure, but to clarity. They get a chemical high from solving problems the same way others get a high from escaping them. This transforms learning from a chore into a compulsion. And once learning becomes a compulsion, mastery becomes inevitable. Then there's the habit of radical focus, an ability to lock onto a task with such intensity that the outside world dissolves. Scientists call this deep work or hyperfocus, but in truth, it's more than that. It's a neural trance. It's the temporary shutdown of everything irrelevant. Remarkably, studies show that during these periods of extreme focus, brain wave patterns shift. The default mode network, the part responsible for wandering thoughts, goes quiet. The attentional networks surge. Cognitive friction disappears, decisions become faster, ideas connect fluidly, and time seems to stretch. People often think of this kind of focus as inborn, but it's trained. It's cultivated. It's a habit. Outlier innovators practice entering this state over and over again, sometimes for years. They treat distractions like enemies. They arrange their environments like launch pads. They don't wait for motivation. They build systems that make distraction impossible. And ironically, this intense focus doesn't make them rigid. It makes them adaptable. Because when you understand something deeply, when you've worked through every flaw in your own thinking, you become flexible. You can pivot. You can reinvent. You can discard yesterday's assumptions, even if you love them, because your loyalty is always to truth, not comfort. Another secret habit, one that is often misunderstood, is the willingness to embrace boredom. Most people run from boredom. They drown it in screens, entertainment, noise. But the greatest innovators don't. They understand that boredom is the gateway to clarity. When the mind is no longer overstimulated, deeper thoughts surface, subconscious patterns rise, new ideas appear. Creativity is not born from chaos but from stillness. Neuroscience confirms this. Some of the most creative breakthroughs occur when the brain enters the diffuse thinking mode, a relaxed, unforced, non-linear state. This state cannot emerge when the mind is attacked by constant stimulation. Then there is the habit that sounds simple, but is incredibly rare, emotional neutrality in the face of failure. Most people experience failure as a wound. High-performing innovators experience it as data. They remove the ego from the feedback loop. They don't personalize setbacks. They analyze them. They extract information. They adjust algorithms, both cognitive and behavioral. Emotion doesn't cloud their calibration. Instead of "I failed, therefore I am less," their brains compute, "The attempt failed, therefore the method needs improvement." That subtle shift in interpretation completely transforms resilience. This emotional neutrality is not coldness. It actually comes from an unusually high sense of responsibility. If the goal is monumental, whether it's exploring space, re-engineering energy, or transforming communication, then personal feelings cannot outweigh the mission. Neuroscientifically, this translates to exceptional regulation in the limbic system, the emotional brain, combined with stronger than average top-down control from the frontal cortex. In simpler terms, they feel deeply, but they act rationally. There is also the habit of reducing friction, a mindset that treats energy as a finite resource and designs life accordingly. People often assume that genius comes from overpowering obstacles through sheer force of will. But in reality, genius emerges from reducing friction so the mind can run with less resistance. Outlier innovators streamline everything: decisions, routines, processes, communication. They eliminate unnecessary mental load. They make fewer trivial choices. They create default behaviors. This is why many of them wear the same type of clothing daily or eat similar meals. It's not eccentricity. It's conservation of cognitive energy. The brain's capacity for high-level decision-making is limited, roughly 3 to 4 hours per day of peak cognitive performance. Innovators protect those hours like a treasure. They don't waste them on trivialities. They spend them where the leverage is highest, on the problems that shape the future. Now, one of the most misunderstood habits of unstoppable innovators is what appears to be workaholism. Most people misinterpret long hours as burnout or obsession. But what is really happening is that once the brain enters a high-momentum cognitive state, it becomes difficult, even painful, to stop. When the neural pathways are firing in sync, when creativity is flowing, when the problem is almost solved but not yet cracked, stopping feels like tearing out a cable that's still transmitting electricity. So they continue. They don't work long hours because they have to. They work long hours because they are inside a cognitive rhythm that the brain itself is reluctant to break. And this rhythm, practiced repeatedly, becomes a habit. A sustainable one, not always, but an essential one, often yes. Because the frontier of innovation does not reward the leisurely pace of comfort. It rewards the relentless pace of obsession. There is another habit, quieter, more private, that sits at the core of unstoppable genius: the internal narrative. The way these innovators speak to themselves is profoundly different from how most people do. Their internal dialogue is not passive. It does not wander aimlessly. It is directed, strategic, disciplined. They ask themselves questions constantly. They evaluate their own assumptions. They perform internal simulations. They run mental models the way others check their phones. Their self-talk is not self-soothing, it is self-sharpening. The brain, after all, is a predictive machine. And outlier innovators feed it predictions, counterfactuals, scenarios, stress tests. They treat thought as engineering. And finally, there is the habit that ties everything together. The habit that turns raw intelligence into world-changing innovation, the refusal to idolize the impossible. Most people see a massive challenge and immediately categorize it as too big, too unrealistic, too far. But the innovators who reshape humanity don't do this. They break the impossible into solvable pieces. They take moonshots and turn them into checklists. They treat the unimaginable like a puzzle, not a wall. And as they break the problem down, their brains adapt. They reorganize. Neural pathways strengthen. Creativity speeds up. Confidence grows. And the impossible becomes the inevitable. ChatGPT said, "Ladies and gentlemen, when you trace these habits back through years of effort, pressure, experimentation, and reinvention, you begin to see a larger pattern, a psychological architecture that supports extreme innovation. And that architecture is built on one defining principle. Life is an engineering problem, not a mystery, not chaos, not fate, but something that can be constructed, optimized, redesigned, and rebuilt as many times as necessary. People with unstoppable genius don't simply live life, they engineer it. They treat their emotions as systems, their routines as algorithms, their challenges as design flaws, and their goals as prototypes. Everything is iterative. Everything is adjustable. Everything is improvable. This engineering mindset shapes every aspect of how they operate. For example, when they learn something new, they don't just store it. They integrate it. They connect it to other knowledge. They expand it. They apply it immediately. The brain loves application. It cements new neural pathways. High-level innovators practice this constantly. They turn every insight into action. And this repetition changes the physical structure of the brain. Neuroplasticity works like a muscle. The more you use a circuit, the stronger it becomes. Over time, their ability to think in systems, solve problems, and generate ideas becomes almost automatic. The habits do the thinking for them. There's also a profound sense of temporal awareness, an understanding of how little time life actually gives us, and how quickly opportunity evaporates when not seized. Many people live as if there will always be more time later. More time to dream, more time to plan, more time to start. But unstoppable innovators view time as the most fragile resource in existence. To them, delaying is death. Procrastination is the enemy. Perfectionism is a trap. They take action not when they feel ready, but when the idea becomes too important not to pursue. Neuroscience supports this. The longer an idea sits in the mind without execution, the more its emotional urgency decays. Action preserves clarity. Motion sustains momentum. And momentum is the oxygen of genius. Another habit that often goes unnoticed is their unusual relationship with stress. Most people interpret stress as a signal to slow down, step back, retreat. But high-performing innovators interpret stress differently. To them, stress is data. Stress is the brain signaling that adaptation is underway. Stress is a sign of growth. And so, instead of withdrawing from high-pressure environments, they enter them deliberately. They train themselves to operate inside high cognitive load because they know the brain only builds resilience when challenged. The prefrontal cortex, the engine of executive function, literally grows stronger through controlled stress exposure. The very environments that overwhelm most people are the environments where unstoppable innovators become sharper. But stress tolerance alone doesn't explain their endurance. There is something even deeper. A psychological anchor that keeps them grounded when the world turns chaotic. You see, behind every extreme thinker, there is a mission so emotionally significant that it reshapes their entire nervous system. This mission becomes a North Star, a gravitational force, an internal compass that overrides fatigue, doubt, and fear. Without a mission, habits collapse. With a mission, habits become destiny. Neuroscience shows that when a goal is tied to personal meaning, the brain's motivational systems activate far more powerfully. Meaning fuels discipline. Meaning creates resilience. Meaning transforms effort into devotion. This is why innovators with an unstoppable mindset don't simply chase goals, they serve missions. And that mission-based mindset creates a habit of long-term thinking that extends decades into the future. They are not building for today, they are building for a timeline the average person cannot even imagine. When your mind is operating at that time scale, your decisions become radically different. Short-term discomfort feels irrelevant. Criticism feels trivial. Doubt feels small. Your brain aligns itself with the horizon instead of the moment. And once again, this becomes a habit, a lens through which every decision is evaluated. One of the most fascinating habits I've observed, one that often surprises people, is the deliberate practice of mental solitude. Not isolation from people, but isolation from noise. Innovators at the highest level carve out time to think. Just think. With no screens, no distractions, no conversations pulling at their focus. They sit with problems until those problems become transparent. They let ideas breathe. They allow intuition to surface. And in those quiet hours, breakthroughs happen that can't emerge in crowded environments. Neuroscience calls this spontaneous cognition, the brain's ability to generate new ideas when it enters a resting but alert state. This mental solitude is not a luxury, it is a ritual. Now, along with solitude, there is the habit of constant environmental scanning, a heightened awareness of what's happening in the world, in technology, in society, in physics, in markets, in human behavior. Unstoppable innovators are not disconnected from reality. They are hyper-connected. They gather information constantly, not to look smart, but to forecast. Their brains become prediction machines. They can see patterns forming long before others notice them. They can anticipate shifts, problems, opportunities. And because they think further ahead than most, their decisions often appear radical, until the future catches up and reveals them as inevitable. But there is another layer, one rarely discussed: the habit of emotional suppression for the sake of clarity. This is controversial because society tells us to express everything, feel everything, process everything. And while emotional honesty is crucial for mental health, high-level innovators also practice something else: emotional sequencing. When emotions hit during critical decision-making, they don't indulge them immediately. They put them in a queue. They postpone reaction. They separate what they feel from what they must do. Later, in private, they process those emotions fully. This separation protects their judgment and prevents reactive decisions. It's not emotional avoidance. It's emotional scheduling. One of the most consistently powerful habits behind unstoppable genius is the tendency to assume personal responsibility at a scale most people would find crushing. They don't wait for someone else to fix the problem. They don't blame circumstances, institutions, or luck. Their default psychological setting is, if something is broken, I must repair it. If no one is doing it, I must start. If it seems impossible, I must attempt it. This habit of extreme responsibility rewires the brain's motivational pathways. It strengthens agency. It cultivates initiative. It creates a feedback loop where action leads to progress leads to confidence, and confidence leads to even bigger actions. This sense of responsibility also makes them highly resilient to criticism. They understand that people criticize what they do not understand, what they fear, what challenges the status quo. Criticism becomes background noise, audible but irrelevant. Their brain filters it out automatically because the mission is louder. The world's opinions simply don't weigh as much as the future they are trying to build. Another profoundly important habit is the restructuring of fear. Most people interpret fear as a stop sign, but unstoppable innovators reinterpret fear as a directional signal, a sign that something important is on the other side. Their minds reinterpret physiological fear responses, the elevated heart rate, the tightness in the chest, the cortisol spike, as fuel, not paralysis. This reframing transforms fear into momentum. Neuroscience shows that fear and excitement share similar neurochemical signatures. The difference is interpretation. The innovators train themselves to interpret fear as excitement, and that shift unlocks a level of action that feels almost superhuman. As we move toward the final layers of these secret habits, one stands out above the rest: the relentless willingness to sacrifice comfort for growth. And not just occasionally, constantly. Growth demands discomfort. Innovation demands discomfort. Reinvention demands discomfort. Unstoppable innovators internalize this at a level that others find unreasonable. They learn to tolerate long periods of uncertainty, risk, failure, and pressure because they know that success requires repeated exposure to the unfamiliar. The brain grows at the edge of difficulty. These individuals live at that edge. But even this habit requires something deeper: recovery. High-level innovators don't simply push themselves endlessly. They understand the neuroscience of restoration. They rest strategically, not randomly. They sleep with purpose. They disconnect when their cognitive systems need recalibration. They protect the brain from burnout the same way they protect it from distraction. This balance, intense output followed by intentional recovery, creates sustainable genius rather than explosive genius that burns out. And now, as we approach the final stretch of this talk, we enter the core of it all, the habit that transforms intelligence into impact. Tell me, continue, and I will. Ladies and gentlemen, at the core of every unstoppable innovator lies one defining habit, the habit that turns imagination into execution, ideas into reality, potential into legacy. It is the habit of relentless iteration. They don't wait for perfect conditions. They don't wait for perfect knowledge. They don't wait for perfect timing. They build, they test, they fail, they refine, and they repeat the cycle hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of times. They treat every version of an idea as a draft. They treat every failure as a data point. They treat every improvement, no matter how small, as a victory. They understand something that most people never fully grasp: innovation is not one giant leap. It is a million micro-adjustments. This iterative mindset changes everything. It removes the fear of starting, because nothing has to be perfect on the first try. It removes the fear of judgment, because judgment cannot touch a moving target. It removes the fear of failure, because failure becomes part of the process, not the end of it. The brain adapts beautifully to iteration. It begins to expect small improvements. It learns to anticipate progress. And progress, even in tiny increments, is intoxicating. It fuels motivation. It sharpens focus. It creates momentum that compounds over weeks, months, years, and decades. Unstoppable innovators understand that iteration is the closest thing humanity has to magic. It transforms weakness into strength. It transforms doubt into competence. It transforms confusion into clarity. And most importantly, it transforms the impossible into the inevitable. The moment you commit to iteration, you commit to evolution. And evolution always wins. But iteration alone isn't enough. It must be paired with another habit. A habit so rare, so misunderstood, that it often goes unnoticed until you look back at the lives of those who changed the world. It is the habit of thinking on the scale of humanity, not the scale of self. These innovators don't build for approval. They don't build for applause. They don't build for status. They build because something inside them refuses to accept the limitations of the world they were born into. They carry a burden to improve, to elevate, to transform. This burden is not heavy to them. It feels natural. It feels necessary. It feels inevitable. When your mind operates at that altitude, your habits change. You stop thinking about what you want. You start thinking about what is needed. You stop worrying about how you are perceived. You start worrying about whether the future is worthy of the generations that will inherit it. You stop making decisions based on comfort. You start making decisions based on consequence. And everything, absolutely everything, becomes infused with purpose. At this point, genius is no longer a trait. It is a responsibility. And there is something extraordinary that happens when responsibility meets obsession. The brain reorganizes itself around the mission. Creativity becomes sharper, intuition becomes faster, decision-making becomes clearer, fear loses its voice, distraction loses its power, fatigue becomes manageable, doubt dissolves. You start operating from a level of coherence that most people never experience. A state where your thoughts, actions, goals, and values align like gears in a machine. And once those gears lock into place, momentum becomes unstoppable. You've seen this phenomenon before in athletes who enter the zone, musicians who lose themselves in performance, scientists who disappear into their research and emerge with breakthroughs. But with the innovators we're talking about tonight, that zone isn't temporary. It becomes a long-term psychological state, a lifestyle, a neurological identity. The habits reinforce the mindset reinforces the mission, and the mission fuels everything else. Now, as we move to the closing part of this talk, I want to bring you into the most intimate habit of all, the habit that sits beneath every invention, every decision, every sacrifice. It is the habit of waking up every single day with the belief that the future can be better, and the unshakable conviction that it is your job to build it. This habit sounds simple, almost poetic, but it is the hardest one to sustain. Because life will challenge it. Failure will attack it. Criticism will attempt to suffocate it. Fatigue will try to erode it. But the innovators who truly reshape the world wake up each day and renew that belief anyway. They don't rely on motivation. They rely on identity. They don't rely on mood. They rely on mission. They don't rely on hope. They rely on action. Repeated, relentless action. And here's what the science tells us: identity-driven behavior is the most powerful force in human psychology. When your actions flow from who you believe you are, not what you want in the moment, your habits become unbreakable. Your discipline becomes natural. Your resilience becomes instinctive. Your genius, no matter how raw or unrefined at first, becomes inevitable. So let me bring all of this together with absolute clarity. Unstoppable genius is not a miracle. It is not a mystery. It is not an accident. It is the cumulative effect of truth-seeking, obsessive curiosity, radical focus, emotional neutrality, deep solitude, relentless iteration, and a mission so powerful that it reorganizes your entire existence. These habits, practiced day after day, month after month, year after year, sculpt the mind into a tool capable of reshaping reality itself. And that brings us to you, sitting here tonight, listening, absorbing, thinking, maybe questioning your own potential. Let me tell you something as plainly as I can. Every human brain is capable of extraordinary genius when trained through the right habits. You do not need to be born special. You do not need a perfect environment. You do not need universal approval. What you need is commitment. What you need is consistency. What you need is courage. The courage to live with the intensity that innovation requires. Because genius is not about being gifted. Genius is about being devoted. Devoted to improvement. Devoted to truth. Devoted to curiosity. Devoted to the mission that keeps you awake at night. The world you want to build will not emerge from talent alone. It will emerge from the habits you choose to live by. And if you choose the habits of those who refuse to accept limitations, those who iterate relentlessly, think boldly, act decisively, and dream at the scale of humanity, then one day, maybe sooner than you expect, you will look around and realize that you have become unstoppable. Not because you were born different, but because you decided to rise beyond what is normal, and you never stopped. Thank you.